Chapter 7, Creating a Nation of Pariahs, the AIDS Fiasco. AIDS CD, it didn't start here. Lyrics from a popular Haitian song. When I first told people I was going to Haiti, those who did not confuse it with Tahiti reflexively commented, "Don't catch AIDS." No other issue, not even the American occupation of Haiti after World War I, could cause a Haitian's blood to boil as did this topic. Bringing up AIDS in the company of Haitians is a faux pas I committed only once. After seeing firsthand patients with AIDS, hearing about the discrimination Haitians suffered because of it, and witnessing the devastation it inflicted on Haiti's already weak economy, I understood the reason. AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, is a failure of the body's immune system to fight off infections. With every breath and with every scratch, human beings are constantly bombarded by hordes of viruses, bacteria, protozoa, and fungi. The immune system battles to destroy these invaders, but AIDS victims are defenseless, so that routine infections become killers. To date, no one with AIDS has survived more than 10 years, as of the writing of this book. In the late 1970s, scattered reports surfaced about patients with rare and inexplicable infections, but it was not until 1982 that a study from the Center of Disease Control in Atlanta characterized the symptoms of AIDS and found that the affected patients fell into at least one of four categories: homosexuals, intravenous drug users, hemophiliacs, and Haitians. Further research revealed that this disease is associated with a virus named HIV-3 and that the transfer of this virus is required before an individual can acquire AIDS. Millions now harbor this virus, but the percentage who will acquire AIDS is uncertain. Presently, it's estimated to be between 30 and 40%, but this percentage has been found to be higher for those who have harbored the virus for several years, leading to speculation that everyone with the AIDS virus could contract AIDS. And of course, much has changed because of the medications they've developed to that. Apparently, for individuals to acquire the AIDS virus, it must enter their circulatory system. Thus, homosexuals transmit the virus if their blood mixes or when the semen of one sexual partner contacts the blood of the other, a frequent occurrence in anal intercourse since rectal tissues tear easily. On the other hand, intravenous drug abusers spread the virus by sharing needles, thus mixing their blood. Hemophiliacs are congenitally deficient in a crucial factor for blood clotting and require transfusions to prevent themselves from bleeding to death. This factor must be pooled from the blood of hundreds of donors so that if a single one has the AIDS virus, the hemophiliac can contract it. Screening procedures have cleared the blood supply in the United States, although theoretical contamination is possible since the test only detects the antibody to the virus, not the virus itself. This test was unavailable in Haiti, and the fear of giving contaminated blood tempered my enthusiasm for transfusing patients. So there always has to be an element of blood involved. Why AIDS has appeared in Haitians is a subject of intense debate. Unlike with the other three groups, no specific behavior or medical need explained the incidence of AIDS in Haitians. To this day, the scientific community has not succeeded in explaining the rationale for this association. However, they did inadvertently succeed in unleashing a wave of discrimination and bigotry that continues to stigmatize the Haitians to this day. When AIDS was initially reported, only about 5% of its victims were Haitian. Black Americans, Hispanics, and whites all comprised larger groups. However, the vast majority of them were either gay, hemophiliac, or used intravenous drugs. Rather than investigate the Haitian connections further, researchers singled out being Haitian as a risk factor based on ethnic association only. The problem was that the physicians writing the initial studies were English-speaking Americans who knew nothing about Haitians or Haitian culture. They asked, "Do you use intravenous drugs? Are you homosexual?" and got no for both answers. Some of the more clever researchers asked the same questions in French and got the same answers. These shoddy methods prompted Dr. Ari Bordes, the Haitian Minister of Health, to comment that the studies had quite a few flaws. When Haitian AIDS victims were interviewed by other Haitians in their native Creole, it was discovered that many of them did indeed fall in the other risk groups. Poor Haitians speak no English and little French, although they often claim otherwise, and did not understand the questions initially posed. Secondly, homosexuality, although practiced in Haiti as it is in all societies, is a big taboo, and gay Haitians would not admit to it, even under intense questioning by native speakers. Also, some of these AIDS victims turned out to be homosexual prostitutes, but did not consider themselves to be homosexual. They were just trying to support themselves and their families the only way they could in a country with 50% unemployment. But none of this mattered. After the media-generated hysteria, AIDS and Haiti became synonymous in the minds of Americans. This destroyed their tourist industry, discouraged business investment, justified the unfair detention of Haitian immigrants, subjected Haitians visiting the United States to a multitude of embarrassing questions and innuendos, and caused Haitian Americans to suffer housing and employment discrimination. Business investment had been increasing in Haiti in spite of the political climate. The industrious Haitian laborer produces everything from computer cables to baseballs at one of the lowest minimum wages in the world, less than $3 a day. But when American retailers refused clothing labeled "Made in Haiti," potential investors were scared. Furthermore, the managers who were needed to start a business refused to live in Haiti. Tourism had been diminishing since the mid-70s, but the AIDS fiasco was its death knell. In the winter of 81-82, 70,000 tourists came to Haiti. The following winter, there were 10,000. As in most Caribbean islands, tourism is crucial to Haiti in maintaining foreign exchange reserves, especially the powerful American dollar. This dramatic decrease cost Haiti 25,000 jobs, and most of them were lost by poor people who worked as maids, waiters, cooks, vendors, and translators. Many hotels closed, and those that remained open eked out their existence with 25% occupancy. While living in Haiti, I was able to rent a hotel room for less than $5 a day. To blame Haiti's poor tourism entirely on the AIDS hysteria, though, is an oversimplification. Haiti does not have a strong middle class to hold down prices, so lodging and food are expensive. Tourists who speak neither Creole nor French get the impression they are being cheated, an impression that is not entirely incorrect. Car rentals are colossally expensive, and the traffic jams in Port-au-Prince that occur when the traffic lights turn off because of a power shortage would perplex even a Roman. One can sit in an intersection for 45 minutes in 105-degree heat. There is only one golf course, and it is just 9 holes. Most tourists I met in Haiti were in the process of changing their itinerary. Cruise ships once came daily, but the passengers refused to disembark, knowing that they would be inundated with dozens of beggars pushing starving babies in their faces. This is the last thing that relaxing vacationers want to see. Avoiding aggressive vendors is impossible. Even when one is swimming at the beaches, vendors paddle their boats beside tourists, holding up chains and necklaces. One tourist told me that when she left Haiti, she was going to look out her airplane window to make sure there was not a Haitian in a parachute trying to sell her something. The government put messages on television requesting that tourists not be harassed, but the vendors I saw did not appear to be in any position to purchase televisions. But the AIDS stigma made this pork industry worse. Previously, there were few tourists. Now, there were virtually none. This was especially evident when I shopped for souvenirs. Before leaving Haiti, I had to buy a wedding present for some friends, so I went down to my favorite shopping spot, the Marché Fay, or Iron Market, in central Port-au-Prince. The Marché Fay is a huge roofed enclosure surrounded by a red wrought iron fence. As I approached, I caught the attention of the outside vendors. The women stood up in their long, colorful dresses and straw hats, holding up cards, watches, chains, sandals, and assorted trinkets. A well-built young man wearing a button-down shirt, gold chains, and sunglasses thrust a stack of 100-gourd notes in front of my face. I asked him the rate. 5% for $100 American, he responded in slightly accented English. I was not interested, but told him that he could never hold that much money out in New York. This is not New York, he said, smiling. There were many black markets in Haiti, but these gentlemen always gave me the best rates if I had cash. They had a large cash reserve from laundering the money the drug dealers made selling marijuana and cocaine to Haiti's upper class. I pushed my way inside and immediately become the cynosure, the blanc, who wanted to buy something. There were at least 100 booths selling everything: statues, masks, oil paintings, pastels, etchings, clothing, tableware. Some of it junk, but most of it good quality work made by the cheap but industrious Haitian workforce. I looked around, and to my disbelief, not only was I the only white, I was the only customer. Here in the largest, best-stocked tourist market in all of Haiti, I was alone, courtesy of the AIDS hysteria. I was soon surrounded by a sea of smiling black faces jostling for position to get my attention. They all looked like recent graduates of the Dale Carnegie School of Salesmanship. One woman shouted, "I have prices most cheap for you." I asked her if she had tableware, but she did not understand, so I translated my question into Creole. She only sold statues. I could see the dejected looks of the others when they heard my Creole. They now knew they could not overcharge me. Suddenly a tall man burst through the crowd, extended his hand, and introduced himself as Mr. Chip. Dressed in a gray suit coat and matching fedora, he beckoned me to examine his paintings while peering at me through his two-tone sunglasses. I did not buy any, but I at least taught him how to say Mr. Cheap. By this time, several people had offered to be my guide. I needed one so that I could shop uninterrupted, but I could not find my old buddy from previous visits. Then he appeared. His limp quickened, and a big smile crossed his face as he spotted me. He could not tell me his name, as he was mute, and I suspected he had been crippled from birth, trauma, or meningitis. Nobody bothered me when I was with him, since the hawkers knew he had some influence over which merchants I patronized. A nod of his head told me whether I was paying a fair price for something. After I left, he would return to the merchants that I bought from for a cut of the action. After wandering around for several minutes, I found a booth with tableware and became interested in a hand-carved mahogany salad bowl complete with 6 serving bowls and utensils. It would be hard to find for less than $100 in the United States. Trying not to appear too interested, I inquired as to the price. The proprietor, another apparent Dale Carnegie graduate, grinned from under his straw hat. $50. In Haiti, bargaining power is directly proportional to one's fluency in Creole, so I switched. Ça c'est piché. That is a bit high. Unintimidated, he told me labor costs were going up. We politely bickered, the price gradually coming down. Being a veteran of many market battles, I knew the 2 key elements to successful bargaining. The first was to avoid offering a counter price until the last minute. Otherwise, the price was fixed at the average of your offer and his previous offer. The other was to never give the vendor the impression that you were doing him a favor by patronizing him. Haitians are proud people, and if insulted, they will refuse to sell. We settled on $18, much less than it was worth, but probably more than a Haitian would pay for it. I could have paid $10 if I had wanted to, but being the only customer in the store gave me an unfair advantage, especially since I came from the country that propagated the AIDS hysteria. I did not even ask him for a bonus, a common Haitian bargaining technique. AIDS was used as an excuse to violate the rights of illegal immigrants who came to the United States. While the American government granted legal status to 100,000 Cubans, 8,000 Haitians remained in legal limbo. Many were retained without due process under the guise of being disease vectors. Even Haitian Americans were not safe. Some who had jobs were fired abruptly, especially those who were illegal aliens. They had no legal recourse. Parents were afraid to send their children to school with Haitians. Haitians trying to sell their houses had to accept half their value. Others were thrown out of their apartments without even having their security deposits refunded. Unlike homosexuals, who could hide their orientation when economically necessary, blacks who speak English with a Creole accent could not disguise themselves. One Haitian businessman told me that when he went to the United States, the customs agent would open his passport with a special pair of tweezers he reserved for Haitians so that he could protect himself from AIDS. The indignities were endless. The Duvalier government reacted in characteristic fashion, arresting known homosexuals, jailing male prostitutes, and closing hotels in the Carrefour district that were known as homosexual hangouts. Although these homosexuals were given re-education programs, this did not revive the tourist industry. At the General Hospital, the AIDS patients were sequestered in a bleak, windowless room where they became non-persons. The sisters obtained permission to feed and clean them since no one else would do it. Occasionally, nurses were seen, with their starched, immaculate white uniforms, neatly bunned hair, and impeccable posture. They appeared to be the epitome of professionalism. The slightest suggestion that they care for an AIDS patient caused them to roll their eyes upward as if to say, "You expect me to touch that?" As more AIDS victims arrived, they overflowed into the depot and then eventually arrived at Saint-Fie, where I cared for them. Diagnosing AIDS with absolute certainty was difficult since I lacked the lab facilities to identify its characteristic organisms or subclassify white blood cells, a test that documented a poorly functioning immune system. However, there were many patients who had the clinical picture of AIDS: fevers, interminable diarrhea, weight loss, generalized lymph node swelling, and persistent cough. Miliary tuberculosis and other conditions may appear similar, but when these symptoms were accompanied by a history of sexual promiscuity and fungal infections, the diagnosis was obvious. Andre had a classic case of AIDS. Stricken with weight loss, a chronic cough, and continuous diarrhea, he was emaciated but did not have the disheveled appearance of my other patients. His skin was smooth and glistening, surprisingly free of the erosions of scabies, but instead he had white translucent nodules over his chest and arms, miniature warts. He had the bull neck of a linebacker, which looked out of place on his stick-like frame, caused by grossly enlarged lymph nodes. His mouth was full of white blotches, candidiasis, a fungal infection seen in immune-compromised patients. I listened to his lungs, hearing a pneumonia in each lobe. "Ou homosexuel?" I asked. He did not respond, and thinking he may not have understood me, I switched to another expression. "Ou massisi? Are you gay?" Again, he did not respond, but the other patients in the room began to snicker. Seeing that I was compromising his privacy, I stopped this line of questioning, as it was not going to change my treatment, but merely satisfy my curiosity. I continued my examination, looking in his rectal area. The skin around his anus was eroded, exposing a wet pink undercoating that was surrounded by amorphous yellow-brown excrescences, herpes warts. Andre was a homosexual prostitute. Taking my ophthalmoscope, I looked into the back of Andre's eyes. This is one of the most spectacular views in medicine, allowing a view of the retina, the brain's extension to the eye. Normally, one sees a pinkish-white circular optic nerve surrounded by an orange-green sea, with smooth, slender arteries and veins coursing through it. But Andre's retina looked like a battlefield, with blood from ruptured blood vessels scattered amidst white streaks of infarcted nerve tissue, the so-called ketchup and cottage cheese retina. Andre had a viral infection of his retina, cytomegalovirus, which was diagnostic of AIDS. Looking into the eyes was a good way for me to diagnose AIDS. "Où est bien? Do you see well?" I asked. "Pas mal. Not too bad." This did not surprise me, as I saw no blood in the macula of either eye. The area of the retina was most responsible for clear vision. My job was to keep Andre comfortable. Since he had a fever of 104 and was dehydrated, I walked away to find some Tylenol and the equipment for starting an intravenous line. "Les gens sidés, does he have AIDS? Does he have AIDS?" the other patients asked. The power of an American media blitz is awesome. Even the poorest of the poor knew about AIDS. "No," I lied. I was not about to see Andre run out of Saint-Fie like the lepers. However, they must have suspected my transgression as they watched me glove my hands before starting an intravenous line, something I'd never done before. I placed it without difficulty, but took great care not to stick myself with the needle. I was not afraid of catching AIDS in Haiti, but took care not to let the blood of a potential AIDS victim touch me. Nobody bothered Andre, and he lived for 3 weeks comfortable and pain-free until he quietly passed away in his sleep. In a sense, Andre was lucky to be in Haiti. In the United States, he would have been subject to a variety of tortures of which even the most imaginative fire and brimstone preacher could not conceive. Even a member of the moral majority who concluded AIDS was God's revenge for wayward behavior would wince when he saw what AIDS victims endured during attempts to cure them. In the United States, Andre would have had multiple spinal taps, skin biopsies, lung biopsies, brain biopsies, eye biopsies, tubes up his rectum, tubes down his throat, tubes down his nose, tubes in his penis, needles in his arteries, needles in his veins, needles in his eyes, and spears in his bones. He would have taken drugs that made him vomit, bile, lose his hair, made him dizzy, burnt his skin, and destroyed his kidneys. He would have had CAT scans, liver scans, kidney scans, and bone scans. He would have been inundated with internists, proctologists, oncologists, ophthalmologists, hematologists, neurologists, dermatologists, pulmonologists, and nephrologists, all ordering different tests to justify their conclusion. After being harassed by residents, tortured by interns, and bored by social workers, he would still have died. Andre was much better off in Haiti, as are so many other people. This is a big problem. That's my part that I'm saying. AIDS was not confined only to men in Haiti. Women prostitutes contracted it also. One patient I cared for told me she made a decent living in the nearby red light district. Carrefour. Catering to the blonde bête, stupid white, unlike most prostitutes I had cared for, she was candid about the details of her livelihood. I asked her if the cards that the prostitutes carried certifying they were disease-free were valid, since visiting Americans who fraternized with the natives often asked me this question. She laughed, telling me that no one was even examined. All the prostitutes did was pay money to obtain the card. This confirmed my suspicion that these American businessmen gave their wives other gifts besides Haitian artwork when they returned. I told her my method of discouraging the advances of Haitian prostitutes. When I first arrived, I would tell these aggressive women that I do not have any money, but they persisted, knowing that a blanc had money by definition. Then I tried telling them I was studying to be a priest, but this just made them laugh, making me wonder how seriously Haitian priests took their vow of celibacy. Finally, I arrived at the ideal response. I told them I was gay. My patient thought this was clever and agreed with me that this statement would discourage all but the most aggressive prostitutes. She had lost weight rapidly in the past 3 months and complained of faiblesse. I examined her, noting enlarged lymph nodes everywhere and a fungal infection in her mouth. Another doctor was visiting, so I asked his opinion. While we discussed her case, I watched her eyes move adroitly from mouth to mouth the way mine did when I was struggling to understand a foreign tongue. She knew that we thought she had AIDS, but never asked me directly. She dwindled away for a month, until only a skeleton with a blood pressure so low that it seemed incompatible with life remained, and finally she died. It was cases like hers that confounded the experts. Although a prostitute, she did not fit into the initial high-risk groups: homosexual, intravenous drug abuser, or hemophiliac. Perhaps as a prostitute she had had anal intercourse with an infected customer. But what became apparent from her case and others like it was quite disconcerting. AIDS is also spread by heterosexual transmission. The AIDS virus initially was only found in blood and semen, but further research revealed its presence in other body fluids: saliva, tears, urine, vaginal, and cervical secretions. This opened up new avenues of possible spread, avenues that public health officials previously thought did not exist. The virus can be in all of those fluids, but on the part of one person, there always has to be blood involved. It can't be vaginal to semen or urine to saliva or anything. It can be in all these things, but has to have the element of blood involved in at least one person, one side of the person. So That's an important thing that most people don't understand, and it makes a lot of sense. But anyway, moving on. In 1982, a New York woman who had no other risk factors contacted AIDS from a bisexual man. In Boston, a man who had an affair with the wife of a bisexual husband died of AIDS. As more cases of heterosexual transfer of AIDS appeared, it was noticed that most of the patients were sexually promiscuous, either prostitutes or individuals who had had at least 50 sexual partners in a 5-year period. With this mounting evidence, the Center of Disease Control decided to list heterosexual contact as a risk factor in 1984. When the Haitians with AIDS who did not fall into the initial risk groups were re-examined, many, but not all, were found to be either prostitutes or promiscuous. Other factors not operative in the United States also surfaced. Like many poor countries, Haiti had many cases of neglected venereal disease, a fact I was reminded of every clinic day when I saw sex organs with open raw sores. This could have facilitated the transfer of the AIDS virus just as the open rectal sores enabled it to be transferred in homosexuals. Also, epidemics spread more rapidly through sick, malnourished populations. Unfortunately, the initial researchers who targeted Haitians as a risk group did not know this and classified being Haitian in itself as a predisposing factor for AIDS. The question still remains, though, how did AIDS get into Haiti? The answer changes practically on a daily basis, prompting New York Times medical reporter Dr. Lawrence Altman to label the enigma as a jigsaw puzzle without a picture. The political stakes are almost as high as the medical ones, with the civil rights of the gay community and the fragile economies of third world countries hanging in the balance. In 1977, the first known case of AIDS appeared in Paris in a Portuguese taxi driver who for several years had had rare intractable fungal and protozoal infections. After bewildering numerous physicians, he was discovered to have a poorly functioning immune system, and eventually he succumbed. When AIDS was later described, he was diagnosed retrospectively to have had it. He and many other early cases found in Europe had one thing in common: they had been to Central Africa. Many scientists are convinced that the AIDS epidemic began in rural Central Africa either by a mutation of a virus or as a previously unknown disease that existed but did not spread until unemployed farmers began to migrate to the cities. Here, in the urban environment of prostitution and promiscuity, the epidemic spread. There is some evidence to support this theory. Frozen blood serum samples from as early as 1973 have been found to have the AIDS virus, and now an estimated 10 million Central Africans harbor the virus. Diseases associated with AIDS, such as Kaposi's sarcoma, a rare form of skin cancer, have been commonly diagnosed in Central Africa for previously unknown reasons. As homosexuality is uncommon, it is thought to have spread heterosexually by unsterilized needles used to give vaccinations or by blood-sucking mosquitoes. Nonetheless, it can't be from mosquitoes because even though it's blood, the blood goes in, doesn't go out. Nonetheless, it was not until the early 1980s that wealthy Africans who go to Paris and Brussels for their health care began to present with AIDS. African health officials have bitterly fought the notion that AIDS began in their countries, pointing out that it could have started as mutation in the Western world's gay community and was then brought to Africa by tourists. An editorial in the Ghanaian Times summarized theories establishing Central Africa as the origin of AIDS as this shameful, vulgar, foolish attempt by white supremacists to push the latest white man's burden to the doors of the black man. African physicians pointed out that the first cases were seen in the industrialized world, not Africa. The enigma is further complicated by African swine flu, a disease of pigs that has the same symptoms in pigs as AIDS does in humans. These infected pigs are found in two places, Central Africa and Haiti. It has been theorized that the disease is transferred by blood-sucking ticks from pigs to humans, but to this date, a common virus has yet to be found. Whether there is a link or whether this is a red herring remains to be seen. There are many ways AIDS could have spread throughout the world. European and American workers and tourists may have carried it back to their respective countries. When the colonial powers of Portugal and Belgium ended their domination of parts of Central Africa in the early 70s, Russia filled the vacuum and required Cuban troops to do so. Some of these potentially infected soldiers arrived on the shores of the United States during the Marielito boat lift, which occurred in the late 70s. One way or another, AIDS ended up in the gay bathhouses of New York City and San Francisco, where an unprecedented sexual revolution was taking place. While homosexuality has always existed, for the first time in modern history, homosexuals had access to random, unfettered, anonymous sex. The drug amyl nitrate enabled gays to maintain erections for hours, longer than the most macho, undrugged male, allowing dozens of sexual partners in a single evening. Fisting, in which a fist is thrust up the rectum of a sexual partner, ripped and tore this fragile rectal mucosa. Further anal intercourse caused the blood and semen to mix frequently. The promiscuity of the gay community allowed it to spread, so that now about 70% of urban gays harbor the AIDS virus. The first gay AIDS victims averaged 1,200 sexual partners a year. Even before AIDS was discovered, numerous diseases were proliferating in the gay community that were usually seen in the third world, such as the protozoal diarrheas of amoebiasis and giardia. This prompted one physician to compare Manhattan to a tropical island. Thus, the HIV-3 virus spread exponentially throughout the gay community, and in several years, millions were infected with the AIDS virus, tens of thousands had AIDS, and thousands had died, the disease having tragically killed young men in the most productive years of their lives. There is no paucity of theories to explain why AIDS was found in Haiti. It has been speculated that bizarre voodoo rites involving the drinking of pig's blood allowed the African swine flu to enter humans. AIDS then spread by closet homosexuality, blood-sucking mosquitoes, and inoculation with unsterile needles. Perhaps this mysterious disease was brought from Central Africa by Haitians working there in the 60s and early 70s. The frequent traveling of Haitians between New York and Port-au-Prince furnished another possible conduit, and of course we know a whole lot more than this now. But to the Haitians, all these theories were nonsense. The source of AIDS in their country was obvious: American tourists. Their feelings were best summarized by Dr. Ari Boards, who said that Haitians were victims, not carriers, of AIDS. American tourists had come to their country, enjoying a veritable sexual buffet amongst impoverished people who will do anything for $5 and spread AIDS. The American scientific community was using Haiti as a scapegoat rather than imply irresponsibility by the politically powerful gays. Who better to blame for AIDS than a poor black nation whose populace did not even speak English? They were hiding the fact that AIDS had been spread heterosexually in Haiti because of the hysteria this information could unleash in the United States. AIDS was all over the Caribbean, but other islands suppressed these data to protect their tourist industries, the bulwarks of their economies. If this is true, AIDS epidemics could eventually appear all over the world, giving new meaning to the expression Yankee imperialism. The Haitians felt they had been screwed, both literally and figuratively. While in Haiti, I was forced to listen quietly while Haitian doctors I met harangued about the unfairness of this stigma. They were especially outraged by the medical arrogance of American doctors who implied that they could not make proper diagnoses in their own people. Haiti did its part and allowed American physicians access to Haitian patients, and in response to their hospitality, they were stigmatized. This is evidence to suggest that AIDS was indeed brought to Haiti by outsiders, possibly American tourists. Prior to 1980, there are no known cases of AIDS in Haiti, and a review of pathological specimens at the General Hospital substantiated this premise. Haitians were noted to have a high incidence of AIDS only because recent immigrants converged upon the hospitals of New York, Miami, and Newark. AIDS turned up in Dominica, Tobago, Martinique, and Jamaica, indicating a diaspora of the AIDS virus. Unlike Haiti, though, these countries did not have as large a recent immigrant presence in the United States. Furthermore, no visitors to Haiti contracted AIDS before 1980. The French, who are not known as having strong commitment to celibacy, had vacationed in Haiti with immunological impunity. Also of note is that the initial cases of AIDS were concentrated in the Carrefour district, a known hangout for gay American tourists. AIDS was virtually non-existent in rural Haiti until the late 80s. Hemophiliacs did not contract AIDS until the early 80s. This is significant because up until 76, much of the cryoprecipitate, concentration of the factor deficient in hemophiliacs, was from Haiti, since the pharmaceutical companies took advantage of the willingness of Haitians to sell their blood at a low price. Jean-Jacques Dessalines and Toussaint Louverture would have applauded in their graves if they knew how the Haitian scientific and political community launched a powerful assault against being stigmatized with AIDS. All warring political factions united and lobbied extensively to have themselves removed as a risk group. One letter to the New York Times by a Haitian physician noted that the incidence of AIDS was higher in New York than Haitians. He asked, why weren't New Yorkers singled out as a high-risk group? The struggle culminated in this unprecedented letter published in medicine's most prestigious journal, the New England Journal of Medicine. The Republic of Haiti has suffered a severe injustice over the past year in the American press. Countless broadcast and print journalists have related stories attributing the origins of the acquired immune deficiency syndrome, AIDS, to Haitians without sufficient factual data to support this theory. Recently, press reports have reflected a shift in opinion about the origins of the disease. Unfortunately, the new evidence often has been hidden on the inner pages, while damaging information about the alleged Haiti-AIDS connection has appeared in front-page stories of American newspapers and journals. Haiti already is the victim of a negative image in the United States, exacerbated by the tendency of the media to ignore coverage of positive steps taken in Haiti towards liberalization and democratization. The volume of media stories relating Haitians and AIDS cast a pall of gloom over the country, deterring potential business investors and tourists from venturing too near. The negative impact on our already distraught economy has been tremendous. It is puzzling to contemplate the reasons for selecting Haiti as a target for origination of the dreaded AIDS problem. We sympathize with all AIDS sufferers and hope a cure will be found before hundreds more fall prey to this deadly menace. Haiti, however, has sufficient problems without being selected as a scapegoat for a mysterious ailment that has sadly descended largely upon the American homosexual community. We as a black nation well understand the pains of world discrimination and trust that a free, democratic system like the United States would be particularly careful to ensure that its medical conclusions are based on objective, thoroughly researched conclusions and not on biased conjecture. The time is well overdue for the record to be set straight regarding AIDS and the Haiti connection. I am sure responsible institutions like yours will uphold your admirable American tradition of unveiling the truth. Fritz N. Cineas, Ambassador, the Republic of Haiti, September 1983. The movement was partially successful. In 1983, the New York Health Commissioner removed Haitians as a risk factor for AIDS, and in 1985, the Center for Disease Control followed suit. However, Haitians are prohibited from donating blood. The origin of AIDS in Haiti may never be known. What is apparent now, though, is that the Haitians as an ethnic group do not have a higher predisposition to AIDS than anyone else, and today only 3% of AIDS victims are Haitian. When one considers heterosexual transfer along with the other risk factors, most, if not all of these Haitian cases can be explained. Since Haiti does not have a large indigenous homosexual community, AIDS was spread heterosexually. Now AIDS is beginning to be seen more frequently in the United States because of heterosexual contact. Unfortunately, the discrimination against Haitians persists, and Haiti's tourist industry has yet to rebound. To this day, when I tell people I work as a doctor in Haiti, those who do not confuse it with Tahiti remark, "I hope you don't have AIDS."